Well, for more on this, David Mack joins us from Washington, D.C., and he's a former U.S. ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. Good to speak to you. So we've just heard from the U.S. Secretary of State. He didn't really say much, but what do you think he has discussed behind the scenes with his Saudi counterpart during his recent visit?
Well, I would hope that he's been far more skeptical in his private comments and his private conversation with the King and the Crown Prince than he has indicated in his public remarks. It's perfectly understandable that we would want to give the Saudis time to get their own thoughts in line, just as we want to make sure that the Turkish government has done as thorough an investigative job as it can with the limited Saudi cooperation that they received. But it doesn't look particularly good when President Trump starts out by making excuses for the Saudis and by suggesting that perhaps that people are too quick to blame them for the fallout from this problem. And particularly when the president emphasizes things like arms sales, which is only one part of a very, very diverse and important strategic relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. So
it's been 2 weeks since he has disappeared. Isn't that enough time, do you think?
I should think it would be enough time if the Saudis are going to tell us the truth rather than make up some kind of alibi and fabricated story about what happened. If they tell us the truth about what happened, it seems to me that they ought to be able to do that quite soon. And of course, we do have our cooperation with Turkey and our own intelligence methods to determine whether the Saudis are telling us a straight story or not.
So if it turns out that Khashoggi was killed on orders of Mohammed bin Salman, what effect is that likely to have on U.S.-Saudi relations?
Well, that depends on how the King Salman responds. If King Salman dismisses Mohammed bin Salman from being his successor, and he's already changed the succession twice, he could change it again. He has half-brothers of Salman, and there are other princes in the Saudi ruling family who have a lot of the experience and credibility, which I'm afraid the Crown Prince lacks. The Crown Prince has shown himself to be reckless and impetuous, and he's showing his inexperience. So King Salman could make a change in the succession, or at least he could remove a lot of the other responsibilities that he has given away to Mohammed bin Salman. But it would be very important also for the United States to focus on a more professional relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is an important strategic partner, and we need to be dealing with the various aspects of our relationship with Saudi Arabia and not just make it a question of whether there's a good personal relationship between the president and the king and the crown prince. That misunderstands the U.S. system. We are not a monarchy. The president is not free to make these kinds of decisions on his own.
Just when you mentioned that, I mean, after the Russian agent and his daughter were poisoned in Salisbury, the U.S. was one of the first countries to impose sanctions and act. Do you think the U.S. will be forced to also act on this issue?
Absolutely. Unless the president takes some very effective actions to make it clear that Saudi Arabia cannot continue to expect business as usual unless it comes clean and honest on this, then he will find that the Congress of the United States will take those actions. He opposed the sanctions against Russia. Nonetheless, they were brought into force by the Congress. The same thing will happen here. There is not much public support for the closeness of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, and while I agree with Secretary Pompeo. It is an important relationship. I think we need to handle it in a much more professional way. And I would say the same is true for our relationship with Turkey. It needs to be handled in a very professional way, and I'm glad to see that is taking place.
So is it professional when we say about an hour ago we heard from the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders holding a news conference on the disappearance of the Saudi journalist, saying the Saudis' human rights record, we already know it and they already have blood on their hands. So does that really have any significance for US President Donald Trump?
It's something that has always been an irritant in US-Saudi relations, but our relations with Saudi Arabia are based almost entirely on shared interests. And we do have shared interests in terms of the stability of the Arabian Peninsula, in terms of the world's relations with Iran, in terms of dealing with terrorism, and in terms of the international economy and maintaining a stable economy. But that does not mean that we can excuse the Saudis from gross human rights violations, especially if it concerns either a citizen or a resident of the United States.
So, David, you worked as a US envoy to a variety of Middle Eastern countries. What consequences will the murder of individuals like Khashoggi have the future of what is a fast-changing and turbulent region?
Well, in the short term, I should think that one consequence of the way the U.S. conducts its foreign policy is that the president will realize that it was a mistake on his part to entrust his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, with handling such a critical relationship as our relationship with Saudi Arabia. Similarly, he has entrusted Jared Kushner with handling our relationship with Israel, one of the other key strategic partners of the United States. If you think about it, the United States has to have a good working relationship with countries like Saudi Arabia, Israel, Egypt, and Turkey. That does not mean that the president and members of his family should have close personal relations. He's got to get over this idea that our foreign policy is determined by the nature of his relationship with a foreign head of state, king, or president.
Well, we have to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for that insight and for joining us here on TRT World, former US Ambassador David Mack.